Hi everyone, it's great to see you again. Today we're going to talk about fundraising, when to fundraise, why it's important, and the different types of fundraising that you can use. So before we jump into it, I just want to do a big disclaimer that anything that I talk about today is completely general in nature and does not constitute financial advice. It's really important that whatever I say, you take it to your sort of financial advisor, to your accountant, and talk to them because in individual cases, the sort of situation might be different. And so I don't have any financial services license and I'm not giving you financial advice. I want to make that absolutely abundantly clear. So please look at this video just for learning purposes. This is not financial advice. Now that we've got that out of the way, let's jump into the myth about needing to raise a capital. It's really important, especially when you're an early stage founder, to know when to raise capital and when not to raise capital. There's a lot of entrepreneurs who come to me who say that the most important thing they need between their idea and this magical unicorn business is funding. Well, that's not true. Right? Funding, if you get funding today, that doesn't mean all your business problems are going to be solved. Actually, that's not even the right place to start. If you've sort of done your homework and looked at different ways in which you can start a business, you would know that the most important thing to focus on, particularly when you're an early stage startup, is your customers and your product. You're trying to understand a problem you're trying to solve for your customers, and then building a product is actually solving that problem, ideally in a way that people can pay you. So once you're able to do that, not just for one customer, but multiple customers, and scale it and grow it, you've got a successful business. Now, some people can decide that that's an organic way that you can grow your business and might not ever need funding. For others, they can use different ways to increase the growth of that business, accelerate that growth as well. But funding never really is the first step, right? It's always important to think of funding as a way that sort of comes after. And the reason why is because it's not easy to raise funding, especially when you're at an early stage. Startups are really risky. You don't want to utilize other people's money, whether that's funds, VC funds, for example, or, grants or other things like that, if you don't have anything certain yet. So it's really important to focus on your startup idea, to validate, to test, and there are a lot of ways in which you can do that. So you can use the lean startup methodology, disciple entrepreneurship, the design sprint as a few different ways to actually take an idea, prototype it, test it, validate it before you actually go out there and raise funding. So now that we've talked about that, it's important to talk about the different types of funding and how they can impact your startup. One of the advice that I give to all early stage startup founders is to do bootstrapping. Now the question is, what is bootstrapping? Bootstrapping is a way of actually building your business with your personal savings or some cash that you sort of put together and really using as little resources as possible to actually test your idea, test your hypothesis, validate your idea, and get to revenue before you get any external investment. Now, why is that important? The reason why it's important is because it helps you understand how to manage money, especially if it's your own money. Hopefully you will spend it a lot more carefully than if it's other people's money. It also helps you to really, decide what kind of decisions you want to make at that early stage of your startup journey. So, you have control, which is a big pro, and you're not really beholden to different interests from different investors or grant makers or other different types of funding. And so there's a really great book called The Bootstrapper's Bible by Seth Godin that you can go check out, and we'll also put it in the links, and that'll give you a lot more information about bootstrapping. A great way to grow your business is through grants. Why should you take grants? Well, grants are a really great way to build your business without really getting diluted. So if you take grants and grant money, that means that you're not selling away shares to your investors, and you're really delaying that, and that's really a way for you to also bootstrap. Now, there are a lot of different grants that are available. Some are sort of a government grant, so local government grants or state government or even federal government, things like accelerating commercialization or medical devices fund or advanced manufacturing growth center, etc. So there's a whole bunch of grants that you can can go and find out. There's also grants that are by corporate foundations. For example, Westpac Foundation has a grant, or AMP has AMP Tomorrow Makers. And again, there's hundreds and thousands of grants that are out there. What I do personally is to look at some portals and websites that try and aggregate all this data about grants. So things like Social Change Central, for example, or there's also the Grants Hub, which you can utilize as a way to keep across what are the different grants that are available. One important point that I want to make is grants can be really amazing, and you could get that free money, but essentially, always remember that there's no such thing as free money. And the reason why I say that is because grants take a lot of time, both in the preparation and the writing, but then also when you actually get the grant, to be able to do a lot of the reporting for it, and then finally, try to make sure that the grants are actually aligned to the startup that you're building, right? So you don't want to be a startup that is actually going and chasing grants, because that could actually distract you and you can drift away from your core mission or your core purpose. So it's really important to focus on your startup and see if grants are relevant and important to you, and only apply when they make sense. So another great way to raise money to build your early product or an MVP is through friends, family, or angel. Now, it's really important for you to try and figure out where you're going to get that early money and to be able to build the product that you need to then get in front of bigger VCs and funds who will invest in you at a later stage. Now, if you have already bootstrapped, if you've already used grants and other mechanisms, then the next really good way to actually raise money is through friends, families, and angels. One of the ways that you can go about doing it is actually talking to your friends and family. If you know that they have money and they're interested in investing in startups, it's really important to clarify that whether you're asking for an investment or a loan. And I'm not saying you can do one or the other, but really important to set the right expectations and letting them know that startups are inherently risky. These are really extremely risky kind of investments, and people shouldn't be putting all of their life savings into that, for example, as an investment. Now, I said it again, I'm not a financial services advisor, so this is just general guidance, but what we're trying to do is really try to protect you, your friends and family from any disappointments and potentially losing their savings. Now, if your friends and families are still interested, that's great. You can tell them about your startup, tell them about the problem you're solving, really pitch the solution you've built and why it's going to make money, and get them to invest in you, not just because they believe in you, but also because they see value in the kind of work you're doing. And oftentimes friends and family are really willing to back you for you because they believe in you and what you can do, and your ability to execute. So that could be a great way to raise funding. Now, the sort of one of the other parts is if you don't have friends and family who would invest in you, or if you're looking for more investors, or just generally at that early stage, there's a sort of class of investors called angels. These are normally people who have money, who are investing in startups, particularly at that early and really risky stages. And they invest, and the benefit that they can bring is in many different ways. Angels not only invest their own money, but they can also bring in expertise and advice, particularly about certain industries. They can also connect you to VCs at a later stage. So getting sometimes investment from the right angels can be really, really beneficial. You can find angels through different angel groups. For example, geographic groups like Sydney Angels or Melbourne Angels. It could also be, just generally you can go to different angel websites like Ellen or VC. You can also look at some specific themes. For example, Impact Angels Network that looks specifically at social enterprise. And so there's a lot of different angel groups that are out there. The reason why you can use angel groups is because that helps you get syndicated investment. Now, what is syndicated investment? It is a way for different angels to pool their money together and then invest in you as a startup. So, for example, one angel might give you $10,000 or $20,000, but 20 angels or 30 angels can give you a combined $500,000 or even $1 million. Now, that can be really beneficial at that early stages when you're really looking for funding to actually help you grow your product to a stage before you can actually go and raise VC money. Another great way to raise capital at the early stages of your startup journey is through crowdfunding. Now, there are two different types of crowdfunding. There's a sort of general crowdfunding, and then there's equity crowdfunding. I'll talk about general first. Within general crowdfunding, you have platforms like Kickstarter, Indiegogo, Start Some Good, and they have sort of different pros and cons. Now, the question is, why should you do crowdfunding? Well, crowdfunding actually helps you, get access to some money, but it also helps you to validate your idea, right? So if you are putting your product out there, particularly if it's a physical product, and doing some pre-sales, it not only helps you, get some money and some pre-orders, but also helps you validate that there's actual demand for it and the market needs it. And if you don't get a lot of people buying it, then you also get feedback that maybe this isn't the best product to work on or the best idea to work on. It also helps you do a lot of marketing, and so people can eventually share it for free, and for a lot of people who've already backed it, this is a good opportunity to get them on your side and become your allies and really share your campaign far and wide. And so I personally think that crowdfunding is important for funding, but it actually is even more important for validation and also for marketing. So keep that in mind. Now, the second part of crowdfunding, or the second type of crowdfunding that I mentioned, is equity crowdfunding, which is a different beast. It is fairly recent and started in the last few years here in Australia, but also internationally. And what it is that you are taking money from retail investors or everyday people who generally can't invest in startups as a sort of class because of various different rules that exist. And so this is a way for them to invest in early stage startups and get a tiny bit of equity, right? This is not your friends and family who you already know and who you can take money from. This is more generally the public. Now, there are some platforms that exist that help you do that. Something like Birchal is a really good place to go, learn more about equity crowdfunding, what is involved, and so on. And it's another way for you to go and raise capital. Now, you could use a traditional way by angels, families, and friends, or you can use crowdfunding, or you could do a mixture of both. But it really depends on the needs of your startup and what kind of work you're doing. If you're building a sort of physical product, oftentimes crowdfunding is a really good way to not only test but also fundraise and sort of put the word out there about your product. So think about a water bottle as an example, right? But then if you're doing something that is sort of intangible, or it's a service or a social enterprise, you can look at specific sort of places where you can go and do that. So Start Some Good is a really great place for social enterprises, but also you can give rewards that are specific to something that the people will get, which is not the same as your traditional crowdfunding where you're actually doing pre-sales. Another really, really important thing to keep in mind is this: the crowdfunding actually is pretty hard. It requires a lot of resources and commitment, and you need to be on top of your campaign whenever you're running it. Different platforms will give you different time frames. So for some platforms, you, for example, might have a month or a specific time frame in which you have to complete the fundraise through crowdfunding, and that could be an all or nothing thing. So it's really important that before you engage, you understand how crowdfunding works and the amount of effort you need to put into it. And oftentimes the reward is not in the funding, but in the validation and in marketing. A great way to raise money for your startup, particularly when you've validated your idea, you've got some money from angel investors or some early capital, and you're now really looking to seriously grow, is through venture capitalists or VC. Now, you would have heard a lot about VCs in different ways. It's really important to understand how VCs work, because once you understand that helps you actually get the kind of capital you need to be able to grow your startup. Now, I want to start with saying that VC funding isn't for everyone. It is actually something that is really specifically for high growth startups. So if you're building a small business, that's fine. It's great. It can give you a lot of revenue. It can give you, that what sometimes VC funds like to call a lifestyle business. It can give you a really good lifestyle, but it doesn't mean that it will help you, you will fit into the VC mode. Now, what is the VC mode? VCs look at certain types of businesses that are really high growth because they have their own investors, and so VCs are kind of like middlemen, and they're investing money on behalf of other people who are called LPs or limited partners. These are rich people who have money and who want to allocate a part of that money towards startups, and so they invest in VC funds, and then VC fund managers basically allocate that capital. It's really important to understand that, because what that means is that VC funds want to invest in particular startups so that they can get a return on their investment with some profits, but then also be able to get towards not only retaining their money and capital to their investors, but also make sure that that they can be they can also make some money on their own. So in that process, it's really important to understand that fund size really matters. If it's a 10 million fund or a 20 million fund versus a 500 million fund, they will have different priorities. And the reason why I say that is because a smaller fund would only have to return that much capital to their investors plus some profit. So for example, a 20 million fund would only have to return 20 million plus something. And what that does is that the way VC maths work is they want to invest in every single company, every single startup, with the mindset that they should be able to return the full fund. Because startups are really risky, and we know that only 10% or less are actually successful, they want to make sure that they invest in a whole bunch of startups, and they don't really know which ones are actually going to be successful, and so any specific, every single investment should be able to return the full fund. Now, this is really important to know, because if you're building a company that is actually not going to be able to return a $20 million to the VC, or $500 million to a VC, or $1 billion to a VC, depending on the size of their fund, then it's not worth talking to them. And it's also important when you're talking to VCs is to understand the stage at which they invest. So you would hear terms like seed or Series A or pre-seed or Series B, whatever. These are some different terms that VCs use. We've got another video which talks about these different terms that you can check out. But really, it is just different life stages of the life cycle of your startup. And so understanding the stage that they invest in and knowing the stage you're in is really important. It's also important to understand the thesis that a VC fund has. And so VC funds have this sort of thesis similar to how you have a hypothesis for your own startup. What it is really understanding the kind of founders they invest in, why they invest in them, what kind of problems they're looking to solve as well, and what are the different industries that they think provide huge market opportunities, what kind of business models they're interested in. By understanding all of that means you can particularly target VCs that are relevant to you. Now, there's a list going around in the sort of Australian startup ecosystem that you can check out, which lists all the different VCs, and really do your research before you actually approach them. I'm happy to connect you with any of the different VCs that are out there in Australia if you like, because I know that a lot of them actually prefer warm intros. So if you're building something that's really great and actually fits the VC model, but just don't have the right kind of networks, I'm very happy to help. Some of the top funds that I would recommend checking out in Australia include Blackbird, VC, SquarePeg, Rampersand, Airtree Ventures, and also Giant Leap, which is particularly supporting impact-led startups. So if you look at sort of these top 5 funds, you'll be able to find some really good diversity in terms of the different ways they think about stuff, but also the different ways that they've allocated capital. You can go to conferences that they run, you can go to different events that they run and office hours as a way to meet them. And my personal recommendation is, if you're trying to build a company and a startup that is that high growth startup, try and get to know VCs early, because they want to not only see your progress, but also see the rate of your progress. Now, this is really important because VCs are trying to return capital to their investors in a very short time frame. So it could be 5 years or 7 years, which is normally the life cycle for fund. And so they really are looking for you to be able to make that significant progress and grow that quickly, to be able to return the money that they've actually invested in you. So if they've met you at that early stage, even if they're not investing in you, say in Series A or later stage, it still helps them see that you've made significant progress in a very short period of time. And that's what they really like to see. VCs also really like to see resourceful founders and founders that have actually bootstrapped. because then like they see that you actually know how to manage money. Another thing to really keep in mind is personally I would recommend going to VCs and raising funding from VCs once you actually have figured out your business model and have figured out how you're going to make money and how you will find that product market fit. The reason why I say that is because once you've found that product market fit, then it actually helps you to raise money on your own terms, to actually have leverage in the conversation. But if you go to VCs and ask and raise money before you've found product market fit, then sometimes one of the biggest problems that can happen is that you can get really unfavorable terms and then would have to probably give away a lot of equity and control. So where VCs can provide a lot of pros in terms of helping you accelerate the sort of your startup journey, really make quick progress, make key hires, get that strategic advice and connections in the industry. It also comes with sometimes cons, which mostly include control, because oftentimes VCs would not only take equity, but will also put people on your board who will also be involved in the governance of the startup. So if you want to keep control, it also means that you've got to be mindful of, how much money do you take from VCs? How much control do you give away? And again, that will vary across industries and the scenarios. So depending on what you're building and how you're building it, VC could be a great way to raise money, or it could be a terrible way of raising money. Last but not the least, we'll talk about debt funding. Now, debt isn't something that a lot of startup founders think about, and that's because it isn't always a preferred instrument of choice when you're fundraising, because you are literally in debt. You've got to give the money back if you've taken a loan. Say it could be a small business loan, could be microfinance, could be venture debt, but in any of those cases, you often have to retain the money, and so founders prefer, for the right common sense reasons, to not take that money as debt. Now, if you're building a small business, sometimes that's probably the only way that you can raise money, is by using something else as collateral and actually raising money through small business loans. But for startup founders, oftentimes that isn't even possible, because you don't have anything as collateral that you can normally sort of give. Having said that, particularly there are specific sort of microfinance organizations that actually help give small loans to specific audiences. So for example, in Australia, we've got Thrive, which gives loans to refugee entrepreneurs that you can check out. There's also Good Shepherd Microfinance and other microfinance institutions in Australia that give those are like small $10,000, $20,000 loans. So if you're interested in that, you can go check them out and find out more information about them. For tech startups, there is this sort of movement of kind of like anti-VC, which is venture debt, and that's really about an alternative way for you to raise capital. Now, if you are the kind of startup who don't want to grow at the rate that VCs expect, which is this really explosive growth, but actually want to grow more organically and sort of have more realistic growth rates, then you can also use venture debt as an option. A really good company here in Australia is called Tractor Ventures. Tractor is the tractor that you normally use for agriculture, and so you can go check them out and see if that's something you'll be interested in.